Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us with Cal Academy's Night School. I'm Nathalie Nagalingum. I'm the Curator of Botany at the Academy, and we have a very special spring edition of Nightlife. We are uniting all of the Golden Gate Park plant lovers, so that'll include the Conservatory of Flowers. So Sarah and Drew will be giving you a live stream from the Conservatory of Flowers, which is pretty special, seeing the conservatories being closed during this time. After them, I'm going to be nerding it out and talking all about the structure of flowers. And then finally, Ryan is going to finish up and talk about his favourite flowers from the San Francisco Botanic Gardens. We have the chat feature enabled, and so please ask us questions. We will be happy to take your questions at the end of each of our sessions. So firstly, I'm going to hand over to Sarah and Drew at the Conservatory of Flowers.
Good evening, everyone. It's so great to see you here from the Conservatory of Flowers. Welcome to the Aquatics Gallery. So this evening we'll be taking you on a quick short walk through the conservatory and pointing out a few spectacular plants. My name is Sarah. I'll be leading the beginning of our walk, and then we'll hand it over to Drew here. All right, let's flip it around and take a look at the gallery here. So, technical math difficulties. All right, so we're here at the Conservatory of Flowers in Golden Gate Park, and actually we are standing in the oldest standing building here in Golden Gate Park, and what we're pretty sure is the oldest wood and glass conservatory in the country, potentially the world. We're still looking for competitors. But a very old, historic, beautiful greenhouse building that transports us to the tropics. So there are thousands of tropical plants from across the world in this building, and we've been caring for all kinds of tropical plants for over 140 years. And tonight we'll be just able to show you a very few of our favorites, but there are many more. The building is looking spectacular right now. So Drew and I haven't been here for the last almost 2 months. Our horticulturists have been on site daily, hard at work caring for all of these plants, and they are looking so good right now because of that. So we're very thankful to finally get a look, and we'll take you with us on a first view of the conservatory we've had in a while. All right, so we're going to start off with a plant that's looking amazing right now, which is our giant water lilies. You can take a look into the aquatics ponds right now. And by the day, these leaves seem to be getting bigger. They can top out at about 6 or 8 feet in diameter. And so these huge leaves are supported by big veins on the bottom. And I think we have a picture actually of those veins underneath that support them that are filled with air. And you'll also notice that the leaves are covered in spikes. That's hopefully to help protect the leaves from predators, things like fish or manatees. You can find these growing on the Amazon River where there might be lots of critters trying to nibble on them, except for these spines, they're really quite spiky. So I certainly would not put my mouth on one of these. So this evening we wanted to share some stories of some of the flowers of the conservatory and their pollinators, and these water lilies are certainly flowers that have an amazing and kind of weird story to them. So you might get a view over here of a flower that's probably bloomed about 2 evenings ago or 3, and now the bloom is kind of falling away and it's bright pink. But just 2 short nights ago, this flower would have been white. And when it opened on its very first night of blooming, this white flower would have heated up. It actually produces its own heat that helps aerosolize its smell. It smells kind of pineapple-y. Very pleasant, especially pleasant to scarab beetles. So these scarab beetles are the pollinator of this plant. They will be attracted to that smell. They'll come to the flower, and hopefully when they arrive, they've got some pollen on them, because at that time, the flower will just have its female parts available, and hopefully that beetle will deliver the pollen and that plant will be able to make some seeds. But if that beetle doesn't, its job is not done. After that first night of blooming, the flower will close back up and hopefully trap some of those beetles inside. And those beetles trapped inside will soon be coated in pollen, because over the course of that day that follows, the plant will undergo an interesting change. The flower will change from white to pink. And I think we have a photo of a side-by-side comparison of these two. Now, once that flower has turned pink inside it, those female parts will no longer be available, and instead, the pollen-producing male parts of the flower will coat those beetles in lots of pollen. And by the next morning or next evening, they will be released back with that pollen. They'll head on their way and hopefully find a new white bloom. So that's the strange and amazing pollinator story of these giant water lilies. And actually, we've got a close-up view of one of these flowers that was just cut off of one of these plants. You can see it's really spiky, so I'm going to touch it pretty carefully. And one really cool thing you can see is the inside of the stem here has little pockets of air. So that's how this plant stays buoyant, by having all this air in its tissues. And all the way up to where the petals are, you can see even on the exterior of the flower, more of those spikes. It's a pretty amazing plant. So these leaves, they are thriving right now. The water lilies are blooming almost daily lately. We have a couple more blooms coming up, and they should continue to do this throughout the summer here at the conservatory. So we hope we'll be able to safely welcome people back here to see them. They should be thriving into the early to mid-fall. They usually shrink away or die back during the winter, but summer is the time that these plants are just blooming and growing huge leaves and putting on a huge show for us. All right, so we're going to take a walk now. We're going to head to our next gallery. Along the way, I'll point out a few things to you, and then I'll hand it over to Drew. All right, so let's take a little walk. So we're headed through the rest of aquatics. So you can imagine we're at a low, slow-moving river of the tropics, maybe the Amazon River. You can see more lilies growing, lots of other aquatic plants thriving, a few pitcher plants trying to pick up an unsuspecting fly in their traps. And then one plant I have to mention, this is called Osa pulchra, and this is the first time it has bloomed at the conservatory for us. And this is a pretty special plant because in the wild, we only know of a couple dozen individuals that grow anywhere in the world. And it's just in a tiny section of Costa Rica's Osa Peninsula, that's how it gets its name, and a little part of Panama. And that's such a small range, only a few individuals out there. This plant relies on just having that very small area to survive, and just a handful of them are in conservatories and gardens around the world. We're lucky to be one of those places. All right, so with that, I'm going to hand it off to Drew, and he's going to take us on a journey to a place quite far away from these lowland rolling rivers. That's later.
All right, I'm going to switch to me just for a second. Hi, everyone. So I was going to take us into highland tropics. So one of the really cool things I love about the conservatory is that we can have such a diverse collection of plants on display, and they can live right next door to each other, but it can be like a totally different environment. So now we're going to travel maybe thousands of miles across the land surface, but more importantly, way up into the high elevation tropics. So our high elevation or cloud forest room is just through this door. So let's switch back. All right, so now head on into here. Right. Woo, I wish everyone could be with us because it's such a difference in temperature. I would guess it's probably easily 15 or 20
Hello, hi Conservatory of Flowers. We are having trouble hearing you, so if you can hear me, please let us know and we can switch over the sound. But in the meantime, I can kind of narrate because I'm part of the advisory board for the Conservatory of Flowers, and I know that right now they're looking in the gallery, and oh, now we've just lost them. But we were just looking at the Dracula orchid flowers, and they were kind of like purpley, sort of blood red, and they are called Dracula flowers because of the blood red color. They're actually orchids that come from South America. So we're just waiting to hear from them, and oh, I think they might be back. Hopefully we can hear them with some sound. Okay, they're looking at some more, and this group of plants are called epiphytes, and that means that they grow on other plants. So epi meaning growing on, so your skin is called epidermis, so that's the outside, and so these plants grow on the outside of other plants. We still can't hear you, unfortunately. Okay, we may switch to my presentation if that works. So behind the scenes, we have Christina, and she is doing all of our coordination between the Conservatory of Flowers, the Academy, which is at my house right now, and later with Ryan at the San Francisco Botanical Gardens. So we might go and I'll tell you about my my flowers, and we'll have my presentation up, and then we'll switch back to the conservatory, and Drew can finish showing you everything that he was going to show you. So let's go to my presentation. If Christina, we can put that up, and here we go. So as you can tell, I have a non-American accent. I'm actually Australian, and so I thought I would start my talk showing some beautiful Australian flowers in a jar of Vegemite, of course. And so I've been thinking about what we can talk about for nightlife, and I thought, why don't we talk about all the spring flowers that are out right now? You know, we're all sheltering in place, but there is so much plant life all around us, even while we're at home. So it could be in your garden, it could be on a walk in your neighborhood. And so I've picked some flowers that you'll be able to see as you go around in your daily lives while sheltering in place. So flowers are so important to us. They mean a lot in our daily lives. You send somebody a bunch of flowers when you're thinking about them. And, you know, this tradition dates back hundreds of years. The Victorians, more recently, they used flowers to deliver different messages. And so, you know, if you were interested in someone, say you would send a red carnation. And so what this means is my heart aches for you. But, you know, if you weren't interested in someone, or if you were unavailable, then maybe you would send a white rose, and that would mean I cannot. So all these flowers had very different meanings, and you could send all these different messages depending on what you wanted to let the person know about how you felt for them. Even before that, flowers had a very different significance. You know, way before the advent of, you know, modern day medicine, people in the Middle Ages were using something called the Doctrine of Signatures. And this is a book called the Doctrine of Signatures, and it dates back to the Middle Ages. And what they did was they thought that Mother Nature, God, had given plants some kind of symbolism so that we as humans could interpret them to use them in certain ways. And so there's a whole range of sort of doctrines that they used, and these are just a couple that I selected. And so in this case, this daisy is an example of something that looks like an eye. And so then they believed that they could use daisies to treat eye infections. You know, if something looked like an ear, then it would, a flower looked like an ear, then it was used to treat an ear infection. I found this one of a unicorn. I really don't know what a flower that represents a unicorn is supposed to look like. Maybe it conferred magical properties. I don't know. But really, this doctrine of signatures is not true at all. Even though I have seen people talking about it, and people do kind of still believe that Mother Nature is sending us a message in flowers. But really, flowers are for pollinators and or for how they reproduce. So Mother Nature isn't really sending us a message. It's sending a message to pollinators, but not to us. And so flowers are the reproductive organs of a particular group of plants called the angiosperms. There are about 250,000 species of angiosperms. We're still discovering many more, but it is the most species-rich group of all plants that are alive today. And they're really significant. They are one of the sort of more recent groups of plants, though, but in that time, they evolved into thousands and thousands of species. I originally started my career as a paleobotanist, so somebody who studied fossil plants. And so I started studying plants like these, and this is an example of a fossil flower, and we do get flowers in the fossil record. These ones are sort of Cretaceous, and so when T-Rex was roaming the earth, these tiny flowers were around. And this flower here is actually charcoal. And so what happened was there were fires during that time, and the flowers then became charcoal. And so as scientists, we can look at these fragments of charcoal and study them. And what scientists have found are the pollen grains here, and they've reconstructed this flower as an example of a modern day water lily. And so when we look at the fossil record, we can find flowers, we can find leaves, and we can find pollen. But the first fossils that we find from flowering plants are 135 million years old. So that's phenomenally old. And the first examples were actually pollen grains. After that, then we start to see flowers and we start to see leaves. Since that time, flowers have evolved into many different kinds of species, and we use flowers for almost everything we eat. Even animal products that we eat have eaten things like corn, for example, which are from flowers. And so we would not be alive if it weren't for flowers. And so they're really important for everything that we do. And so I want to kind of nerd out and tell you a little bit about flowers so that as you are sheltering in place, you can see all of the amazing diversity around you and look more closely at flowers and see what's there. So I took this photo this morning as I was on my daily walk, and so I'm going to kind of virtually dissect this plant for you. And so this is kind of what we consider a typical flower. It has the male parts and it has the female parts. So the male parts consist of the anther and the filament. So it's the stick and the anther, which is like that little sausage thing at the top. And so together we call this the stamen. And these vary with different plants. You can have a few stamens. This one has about 50 to 100 stamens. It just depends on the particular species that you're looking at. Then we have the female part of the plant, and that's at the center of the flower, sorry. That's at the center, and we have three different names for them. We have the stigma, which is at the very top. We have the style that goes down from the stigma, and then we have the ovary at the base. If you look at that from the side view, and I decided to choose my crappy photos that I made today so that you can see this is really easy to do, and you can see all of these with the naked eye. You don't need special equipment. You don't need a microscope. You can just see all of this by yourself. And so if you look at it from the side view, the ovary is at the base, and it's the ovary that has the eggs, and those eggs are what gets fertilized by the pollen. So we have the stigma at the top. It goes all the way down to the style and the ovary. And then the last part, which I'm sure you all know, which is the petals. And this is, I turned the flower upside down to take this photo, and that's my kitchen table. And then we have the sepals at the base, and the sepals are typically green. So just to recap, this is a flower that I pulled apart just this very afternoon. We have the sepal, we have the petal, we have the female part, and then we have the male parts. And when we look at, this is kind of like a stylized picture. You can see all of these parts really clearly, the male, the female, and the petal and the sepal. And so what happens is that the anther releases the pollen. Pollen will land on the stigma, either through wind pollination or an animal will transport it over. And there's really complex molecular reactions that go on to determine whether that pollen grain should actually germinate. And there are people who have discovered the genes that are involved, and sometimes there are genes that stop a plant from reproducing with itself, so it stops inbreeding, and those will allow they will stop the pollen grain from germinating. Pollen grain germinates if the molecular chemistry is correct. It'll go all the way down the style, and then it will travel around the ovary and fertilize an egg. And then that will grow into a seed, and this ovary here develops into the fruit. So that's it. That's the birds and the bees. And so, of course, nature is wonderful, and there's so many variants of it. And I'm going to take you through a few different kinds of variants. So what I just showed you is what we consider a perfect flower. And botanists, we have so many different terms, but a perfect flower in the botanical world is one that consists of a male and a female part. And so in this case, we have the male parts, and then we have the female parts at the center. So that's a perfect flower. We have imperfect flowers, and those where the male parts and the female parts are separate. And so we call those unisexual flowers. In this case, you can see that's the male parts. So those are the anthers. And then over here, we have the stigma, which is divided into 3 prongs. And so these are both imperfect flowers because the male and the female flowers, or the parts, actually form separate flowers. You can have free petals like this amazing magnolia. And so you can see each of those petals is actually separated on the flower. Or you can have petals that are fused to form a tube. And in this case, this is called an angel's trumpet. It's also psychedelic. This is not a photo I took. So these are, all the petals here are actually fused. And I have a few examples of some fused petals that I'll show you in a minute. We also have solitary flowers. So that means flowers that are by themselves. That is pretty, makes sense. And then we have another botanical term, which is an inflorescence. And this is where things get cool, because an inflorescence consists of many flowers. And so I'm going to show you a few examples of all of these. So here is an example of a flower where the petals are free at the top, but most of the length you can see is fused over here. And this is one that I picked on my walk this morning. And apologies to people who live in the Sunset and Coal Valley if I pinched your flowers. So you can see the stigma at the top and the stamens in the center there. I have another example of a fused flower, and you can see that one there. In this case, you can't, the petals aren't free in any way. They're completely fused all the way to the top, right there. And then the final example that I wanted to show you is actually an inflorescence. And the way that you can tell an inflorescence is you can't see any of the leaves until down here. And so an inflorescence means that there's a whole bunch of flowers in all on one stem. And the leaves are the base, is considered the beginning of that inflorescence. And if you think about a plant, then they're going to have an inflorescence when they want to attract pollinators. If you have a lot more flowers, then it's easier for a pollinator to come and see it versus one single flower. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk to you is about a group of flowers called the monocots. And so those are a whole bunch of different families. So we group plants, or most of all of life, into different families. And so a couple of the families that you would be familiar with are lilies and tulip, which is in the Liliaceae. So anything that ends in ace with the CEAE is a family. So there's the lilies and the tulips. And we also have the irises is another example of the monocots as well. A distinctive feature of monocots is that all of those parts are in three. And so here, this is a picture I took in the Australian bush last winter. And this is a lily in the Aussie bush. And we can see there's three parts here, 1, 2, 3. And that is a distinctive feature of monocots. You can have 6, 3, you can have 9, but they're all in multiples of 3. The other really cool thing about monocots is that they do not have separate petals and sepals. They actually have tepals. And this tulip shows you really nicely that you can't see any green sepals at the base. So in fact, what you have is multiple groups of tepals. The daffodils are a special case. They have, you can see here is one tepal, here's a second, and here's a third. So that's the first, what we call a whorl, which is spelled WHORL. That's one whorl of tepals, and then we have a second whorl of tepals. So it's 1, 2, 3 there. So that's the third whorl. And so you have parts in 3 again. Daffodils have this very special feature called a coronus, a corona meaning a crown. And when we look at the genetics of the corona, even though it looks like a tepal, it's actually derived from the stamens. So it's actually derived from the male parts. It has genes that are similar to the male parts. And so what's happened is that those male parts have been co-opted into fusing and forming this different structure. And so I wanted to show you some examples of some monocots that I picked this morning. So again, you can see this one here, it has 3 petals and there are no sepals at the base. Another one, which I picked from just down the road, is an iris. And again, it has no sepals. It just has those tepals there. And it has parts of 3 as well. So here's the various parts in 3. Another group of monocots that you're all familiar with are orchids. Orchids have thousands of species. They occur mostly in the tropics, and they form different relationships with pollinators. And I just thought, seeing that many people have orchids that they're growing at home, I thought I'd go through the structure of an orchid flower. I have to admit that I'm terrible at growing plants. And so I have had an orchid that I was given, but I killed it. So please don't ask me any plant-related questions on growing plants. Anyway, so that was a total aside and a total confession. But orchids have, again, the parts of 3. So they have the outer tepals. There's the 2 outer tepals at the base over here, and then 1 outer tepal there. So that's the outer whorl of 3. And then they have the inner whorl of 2 tepals there, and another tepal which is modified into something called a lip. When we look at the structure within the orchid flower, what we have is a really modified female and male part, and that forms something called a column. The stigma is inside the column, and then at the top of that, we have the anther, and the pollen is actually packaged into this special structure, or these special structures called the pollinia, and that's what sticks to the back of insects once they get pollinated by, once they pollinate an orchid flower. And then, so the next family that I want to talk to you about are the daisy family. Daisies are pretty incredible. There are so many species, and we as humans have created so many varieties as well. We use them. We eat sunflowers, we eat lettuce, we eat artichokes. They're really important to us economically and also visually as well. The thing that I remember when I first had my first botany class that completely blew my mind was that daisy flowers are actually an inflorescence. So if you remember, an inflorescence is a bunch of flowers. So what you're looking at here is probably about 50 flowers. So I'm going to I blew this one up, and this is a dahlia. And what you have in the center are individual flowers. And here you can see, here, this is that little ring here is one individual flower. Those are the petals. And at the top is the stigma. Each of these things, these red bits over here, is one separate flower. So I'll just go back here. So this is one flower, here's another flower, here's another flower. So there's a huge number of flowers within any kind of daisy flower. So that's your sunflower, this dahlia, a chrysanthemum, a dandelion. So just so you know sort of more closely what they look like, what we call yarrow flowers, again, are composed of many flowers. And when you pull them apart, you have the flowers in the center, and then you have the flowers on the edge. And the ones in the center are what we call disc florets. And so this over here, it looks exactly like that. The one on the edge is a ray floret. And here you can see there's the two parts of the style. And in this case, you have the anthers. And so once I learned that, I started looking at all of the daisy flowers and was completely intrigued by how something that looked like one flower is actually multiple flowers. And so next time you see a daisy flower, pull it apart and have a look. You can see with this sunflower, for example, when you pull it apart, these are all the flowers in the middle, and this is the flower on the end. With this chrysanthemum, you actually have all of the flowers that are what we consider the ray florets. So we have the disc florets and one ray floret for a sunflower. In a chrysanthemum, we have all ray florets. You can also have also all disc florets in other daisy inflorescences too. And so I wanted to show you a gerbera that I picked this morning. Again, apologies to my neighbours. So here is the gerbera, and I pulled it apart. So botanists are very keen on pulling everything apart. So this is many, many flowers, and to show you, it's really a tiny flower here, but this over here is the one flower that I pulled. And so that has a really large petal. And then the other one, and I don't even think we can see it, is the disc floret, which is right here. It is tiny, but once you start to look at your own flowers, you'll be able to see those yourself. Okay, and then the final group of flowers that I want to talk to you about are flowers that have bracts. Now, these are actually modified leaves. Again, another really weird category, and something that botanists, we love to have terms for as well. And if you're in the south, there's things like dogwoods. At Christmas, we have the poinsettias, and what we have in both of these are at the very center, there are flowers, and the bright coloured or the white coloured structures on the outside, they're actually bracts. And when we look at the development of those, they're actually leaves, they're not petals. And again, so bougainvillea, you have another example of flowers that are clustered in the center. And so this is pretty easy to see. The flowers here, you can see the flowers are fused, the petals are fused to form a tube. And in this case, we have 1, 2, 3 flowers, and then the bracts are bright and purple. There's also bracts in arum lilies, in the philodendron family, and within these are actually called lilies, but in the botanical sense, they're actually not lilies. They're a different group. And so the bracts are in this group, the bracts are reddish, and it's actually the pointy bit which is the flowers. So here we go. Here's the flowers over here, and here are the pollen grains. So I'm just going to show you a flower from the Conservatory of Flowers. This is actually the Titum arum, and this here is the spadix. So that's the center, that's where the flowers are, and that's the bract over here. So speaking of the Conservatory of Flowers, I am going to cross over to the Conservatory of Flowers right now, and then we'll take some questions afterwards. Hi everyone, it's me back again. So unfortunately, it looks like the conservatory don't have sound. So I am going to answer some of your questions. So I have a question from Freddie, and Freddie wants to know, do all flowers have both male and female parts? Uh, so I guess that was just before the part where we talked about perfect and imperfect, but really the large majority of flowers have male and female parts. And this is one of what we call an innovation in the plant world, where flowers and the angiosperm group actually have the male and female together. And so if you think of, say, a conifer tree, the male and the female parts are in different cones. And so with the flowers, they're united together. The next question is from Meenal, and they would like to know, how are the colours of the petals guessed from the charcoal fossils? And we don't know. And so really, in terms of any kind of fossil reconstruction, what we do is we look at the living plants and we kind of make a guess about what they would look like. And so it's really a guess. We don't know, but we can definitely look at the overall structure and show what it looked like. Madeline wants to know, are artichokes daisies? So yes, artichokes are in the thistle family. So they're with thistles and daisies. And so all of these plants, such as dandelions, they're all part of the same family. So I think if I have really one message from tonight, is go and dissect a daisy, dissect a dandelion. You can even, if you have a magnifying glass, you can look at all of the parts. Sometimes we use what botanists call a jeweler's loupe, L-O-U-P-E. You can buy those cheaply. And you can look at those, all the different parts, and you can look at the stamens and the stigma in close detail. And it's just fascinating. And so now we are going to go back. I'm not sure if we're going to try the conservatory again. But in the meantime, actually, I just wanted to show you a couple more things. So these are the lilies. And so actually, I'll show you the whole plant. This is actually growing in my back garden. So these are the lilies. Again, these are the bracts. This is the bract, even though before tonight, you probably thought it was a petal. What I did was I ripped off the bract, and when you look inside, what you find is this. And so here are the male flowers, and you can get pollen. I got pollen on me before when I was ripping this apart. And over here are the female flowers at the very base. And so where the insects crawl in, they go down and they pollinate the flowers down here. And then one of the final things that I wanted to show you was the bougainvillea flower. So again, something I took from my neighborhood walk was these. We have the bracts on the outside, and then we have the flowers on the inside. So there's a really pretty white flower. So I hope this has inspired you to have a look at the flowers that you see in your house, around your neighborhood, and then just have a new appreciation for really the amount of diversity and life around you. So we're going to head over to the conservatory, and hopefully we will be able to hear them this time.
Hi, everybody. Third time's a charm. Hopefully you can hear us. All right, so here we are again, high elevation cloud forest, and right above me here is a lovely example of a Dracula orchid. Sarah, if you want to get in there nice and close. And as Natalie said it earlier, orchids have very specialized systems for their pollinators, and they're in the center. And we also have a photo that we can show you as well that shows a couple of Dracula orchids and their very specialized lip. And that lip on the Draculas is actually made to look like a tree fungus. And its pollinators are actually little tiny fungus gnats who come there hoping that there'd be maybe a nice snack. And instead of a snack, they end up finding an orchid. And by looking for their food, they end up getting stuck with the pollen and then delivering it to a nearby Dracula. There are some 100 species or so of Dracula orchids, and we have quite a few here at the conservatory. They naturally grow on vines and things, just as you saw above me here. And we have this lovely new installation. So once it's safe for everyone to come in, make sure to look up while you're here in the conservatory and you'll see all sorts of little special surprises. All right, so now I think we're going to move into our potted plants room. So we're going to take a little walk across the conservatory. I'll see what I can point out. As you might guess, a greenhouse is very reliant on sunlight, and so we are quickly losing our sunlight. But so we're going to pass through quickly the lowland tropics room. Here we have some really recognizable things you'll see above me, these giant leaves, bananas, lots of palm trees. And you can hear our chorus of real life crickets, everyone. Also, if you happen to come into the park, we've been noticing a lot of folks looking in the front door, probably longingly at our beautiful tropical paradise. And we do have quite a show that our horticulture team is very hard at work continuously putting together so that you can enjoy a little bit of our paradise inside from safely outdoors. Right here, this lovely cycad. Talk about ancient plants. We just learned that flowering plants are around 135 million years old. The cycads are some couple 100 million years old, maybe even more. Right. So we wanted to bring you into potted plants tonight to show you a few plants that are actually in that Amorphophallus genus. So Nathalie mentioned the corpse flower and had a very lovely photograph of it in bloom some time ago here in our gallery. And we actually have the same species that's currently in leaf. So this thing here, which looks like a really large tree, or maybe a medium-sized tree, is actually one single leaf. So when you look up there, you'll see all these little tiny, what look like leaves, but if you look close enough, you'll see that they're all kind of, tied together. They're all one piece. And so those are what we refer to as leaflets in the plant world, and this is all one entire leaf. And you can actually check on Fridays. We are putting up posts on our Instagram that show us the actual height of change each week. And this thing has been growing sometimes by a few feet in just 1 week. So definitely stay tuned there and you'll get some fun updates each week as we go along. But this is definitely the largest one, but there are, I don't even know honestly how many, maybe dozens of Amorphophallus species. And while this one only blooms once every 10 years, we have a few others over here that actually bloom quite more frequently. This one actually blooms fairly often. We have this in display, I almost feel like more often than we don't. Looks like our camera has decided to track me. Here we have Amorphophallus henryi. And this is one that you're probably glad that we don't have smell-o-vision at home, because while it's not as pungent as the large relative we just walked away from, it has a definite aroma of a nice dead rat. So it's not too terribly stinky right now, but I've certainly been here on days where people were looking under the benches for something not so exciting. All right. I think that's about it for us from here at the conservatory. We can probably take a few questions. I don't know if you can see this, Sarah.
All right, yes, I'm back. I think we're gonna just stand a little staggered here and take a few questions. So we'll take a look. I think we had a question about the giant water lilies that I really enjoyed earlier. It was a question of what happens when these leaves are crowding each other on the water, and you'll see that does happen in our aquatics gallery here. Another thing you might have noticed is the leaf edges are turned up and they almost make bumpers. So this plant has a great adaptation for pushing its neighbors out of the way so that they can maximize how much space is available on the water top. Of course, that's not unlimited space, especially when you are in a little pond inside the conservatory. So at a certain point, these will crowd each other to the point of damaging the leaves here at the conservatory. So our horticulturists will trim some of those leaves away to make sure that they all get enough space on the pond. All right, so another question we had was, what's the temperature and humidity in the orchid room? So I'm guessing that's referring to highland tropics.
That's a good question. It definitely fluctuates like any natural environment throughout the day and the night. most of our galleries, if you were to visit on any particular day, it's usually around 70 degrees and well over 70% humidity in almost all of our rooms. The Highland Tropics room is more unique for the nighttime temperatures. It is definitely cooler in there during the day than most of our other rooms, but the nighttime temperature is the key. So it can drop in there maybe like 10 or 15 degrees, I would guess. But it sort of constantly fluctuates. That's actually another sort of unthought of job, I think, of our horticulture team, is that they are constantly monitoring the temperature and the humidity in our galleries. And while some of the vents open on their own with a computer, most of them are reliant on our horticulture team to open and close them to manage the temperature.
Great. All right. I think we had, should we take one more question or, oh, I think we lost our, oh. I don't see any more questions here. Oh. All right, I think we have a question from Leah. Has lack of carbon dioxide from visitors affected the ecosystem in the conservatory at all? That's an amazing question.
That's a great question.
I think people often think of the conservatory as a sealed environment, but it's actually quite connected to the outdoors. This very old, over 140-year-old building has many cracks that let air in and out. We have those vents and such as well. Of course, all these plants are used to growing outdoors where they don't have people literally breathing down their necks all the time. So I think they're doing just fine without the extra supply of carbon dioxide from our visitors.
It looks like it. After 2 months of not being here, it looks incredible. I wish we could share it in person with everyone.
Yeah.
Hopefully this is as close as we can get.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us here at the conservatory. It was a delight to get to visit and bring you along for a little sneak into the conservatory this evening. Thank you again to our horticulture team for taking care of this place, and we hope to be welcoming you all in person again soon. Otherwise, have a great evening, everyone, and I think we'll be handing you off to the Botanical Gardens next.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Sarah and Drew, for giving us a peek inside the conservatory while we've all been sheltering in place. Next up, we're going to have Ryan from the San Francisco Botanic Garden. He's a curator there, and he's going to tell us about his favourite plants. He's actually in the Botanic Garden library right now, and so I'll hand over to Ryan. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Let me just pull up my screen with some great photos. And we're getting started just in a moment. There we go. Wait, wrong one. We're having slight technical difficulties, but bear with me. Let's see. Why are we not going where we need to be? Let's see. Stop showing. One more moment. No. Is this working? I hope. There. Oh shoot. There we go. I think we're rocking and rolling from this point. Okay. So welcome everybody. I'm so excited to be invited, and thank you Cal Academy for letting the garden join on this really fun nerd night. I'm really happy to bring you some of my favorite flowering plants here at the garden because I know many of you can't be here right now, but we are opening June 1st. That's what our goal is. Hopefully everything goes okay, and even here, we hope we can have some more really nice social distancing experiences out in the garden. So just to kick it off, also just have you all back to also buy some plants too, so you can bring some of these cool plants you've learned about today and learned how to dissect and bring them home with you. So we'll kick it off with some really fun stuff, and one of my favorites is Ceroxylon kinduens, also known as the Andean wax palm. And so I'm really glad Natalie mentioned monocots, because this is actually the tallest monocot in the world, getting up to 200 feet tall in the high elevation cloud forests of Colombia and Peru. And so this is a really cool plant with this beautiful, I think quite sexy, white trunk with these really cool leaf scar bands. And actually, our two specimens here at the garden actually bloomed for the first time, and it's the first recorded flowering of this species in North America. So that's really quite exciting. Another fun and gorgeous plant is the magic dogwood, or Cornus florida var. Urbaniana, variety Urbaniana. And so this is really cool. The bracts, which we just learned about on this species, actually are fused and recurved, kind of forming this weird sort of bow tie or UFO sort of effect to the flower structure. And Cornus florida is actually the same, so this is actually a variation, a variety of the same species of dogwood that that occur in the southern US and that are quite famous. And so it's really cool to see these up close. And these actually occur from high elevations in northeastern Mexico. So it's just a really cool thing to see. They're blooming, they're going full go right now at the garden, and they're just spectacular to see. So hopefully they'll still be around for a little while longer. Another fun favorite, which are blooming right now, are Papaveroias, or red poppies. And so these have a really broad range going throughout much of Europe. And throughout much of the Mediterranean region. And so I have a really deep connection with this plant because in my previous jobs, both in Amman, Jordan, and Jerusalem, poppies were very common in springtime, along with red anemones and red buttercups. And this is really quite cool because they're all pollinated by these this one species, this one group of beetles, which I'm going to mispronounce, glaphrid beetles. And so they actually mate within the flowers. And what's really cool is there are at least three different kinds of large red flowers, and they bloom in succession, so they don't compete with each other. So all of them can get pollinated, not have to compete for pollinators. Another fun, amazing plant, which is looking stunning right now, is Digitalis canariensis. And for some of you avid gardeners out there, you might be a little confused. That doesn't really look like a foxglove or Digitalis, but originally these were named. It had the name Isoplexus canariensis, and so there's a whole group of shrubby foxgloves that are native to Macaronesia, or the Canary Islands, and Madeira and the Azores. And so in around 2004, with some phylogenetic studies, they actually found out that Isoplexus really were not that much different than Digitalis. And so they grouped them in. And so this is a really cool sort of shrubby herbaceous plant, or herbaceous shrub. And they can get up to 4 to 6 feet tall. They love our climate here in San Francisco. These really beautiful orange flowers. And they're just really big magnets for nectar feeding birds and other pollinators. So really quite beautiful growing on our Heidelberg, in our Mediterranean collection on Heidelberg Hill in the garden. Bringing it a bit closer to home, we all love our natives, and this is really one of our showiest. This is the Western Azalea, or Rhododendron occidentale, and this is an incredibly fragrant, beautiful plant. And our plants in the garden in our California native section are blooming fantastically. This is a really cool specimen here. It has like white and pink and orange in the flowers, but they can come in a broad range of flower colors, which is really cool. So they can come from whites to yellows to pinks and all these sort of mixes and shades in between. And so very fragrant. They were actually used in breeding work to add fragrance and more color to other different deciduous azaleas. So really great. They love water, broad range from Oregon all the way down to San Diego County. So as long as it's wet, they can really handle it, and they're really quite stunning. And another, we're looking at a composite flower. I'm really thanking Natalie for setting up so many great stories. So this one's Dahlia tenuicalis, and dahlias are the flower of San Francisco, and we have some really amazing species dahlias in our Mesoamerican cloud forest collection. And this is also a plant I really like because it's a good example of a connection that the garden has had with Cal Academy. So our Mesoamerican cloud forest was made possible by the efforts of Dennis Breedlove and his past curator of botany at the Cal Academy. And he did extensive botanizing and collecting in southern Mexico and Oaxaca and Chiapas, and that's where we got this species from. So we've had this species in our collection since the 80s. And it's just, it's a huge dahlia. It's considered a tree dahlia. So they can get up to 15 feet tall, and we have some really big specimens here in the garden. But If you look close, you can definitely see that composite flower shape we just learned about earlier. And another fun showstopper is Puya alpestris, or the sapphire tower. And this one's really great. You get this sort of monster, this unearthly turquoise metallic color, which is really quite uncommon in the botanical world. And so this is a bromeliad. It's in the Bromeliaceae family. And so that's the same family as pineapples. And one thing I really love about this plant, besides the color and the real beautiful, like spiny, silvery leaves, is that when you look at the large inflorescence, the giant flower stalk structure, which we learned about earlier, you'll see these sort of protrusions coming out. And those actually serve as perches for nectar-feeding birds to sit and drink the nectar, because these flowers are just chock full of nectar. And if you were to shake it, a lot of sticky nectar would drop out. It's really quite stunning. And we have several different species in our collection. And another fun one, this one is not blooming now, but it's another one of my favorites. This is Magnolia sharpii, and this is an endangered neotropical magnolia species. So neotropical meaning New World tropics. And so Mexico actually has very high diversity of magnolias, though we do think of them more as a group from the East Coast, southern East Coast, United States, and from Asia. But this is an endangered species in the wild, can grow up to 100 feet tall, where it grows in high elevation pine and oak forests. And this one's an endemic to Chiapas, Mexico. And the last plant to keep us on track, and one of my absolute favorites, is Fuchsia denticulata, known as the fanfare fuchsia, but I have a special nickname for it. I call it the Lisa Frank fuchsia. And so for any of you who are around my age or have kids my age, you're probably quite familiar with the psychedelic rainbow-colored leopard notebook covers and stationery. And we're usually quite familiar with fuchsias being sort of like pink and purple, roughly pom-pom things. But species fuchsias come in a broader range of colors, typically in hot, bright neons and reds and magentas. And this one species seems to have all the colors in it, which I really quite like. And so definitely this one blooms for us almost year round, as long as we don't get a hard frost or a heat wave, but it really is a true cloud forest species. So it likes it foggy and cool, and loves our sort of Goldilocks San Francisco climate, which really mimics its natural habitat in high elevations in Peru and Bolivia. And to finish it all off, thank you all so much. And I'm happy to answer any questions if we have any time. So I'll stop sharing my screen and we'll go from there. Oops. So let's see. Do we have any? Nope. Okay. So Christina, Natalie, is there anything else?
Hello, Ryan. Thank you so much for that. So we did have a question, and somebody asked if the guidance helps to stop actively from the species spreading to other regions into the local environment.
You know, that's a really great question. Part of what we do in a botanical garden is we bring plants from other parts of the world. And so there always is a risk that some plants may be a little too rambunctious and escape. And so what we make sure, anytime we bring new plants into our garden, we definitely watch. And if they start to look a little too comfortable and definitely want to start spreading, then we get rid of them. So we have a responsibility.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Ryan. We don't have any other questions. So with that, I will end Nightlife and say thank you so much to Ryan from the San Francisco Botanic Garden. Thank you to Sarah and Drew from the Conservatory of Flowers. If you'd like to follow them, the San Francisco Botanic Garden at Instagram is SF Botanical Garden, and the Conservatory of Flowers is Conservatory of Flowers, all one word, at Instagram as well. There's many beautiful pictures of various plants, not just flowers. And so please have a look at them. I follow both of them and love seeing what they do. So please join us next week for Nightlife, same time, same place. Thank you and enjoy the world around you.